Meanwhile, social media platforms are under heavy scrutiny following the terror attacks in London over the weekend. Speaking on Sunday, Prime Minister Theresa May went directly after the tech industry, saying it needs to step up its work to fight terror.
We cannot allow this ideology the safe space it needs to breed. Yet that is precisely what the internet and the big companies that provide internet-based services provide. We need to work with allied democratic governments to reach international agreements that regulate cyberspace to prevent the spread of extremist and terrorism planning.
But tech firms say they already police their platforms and are working to form a common database to more easily identify terror-related posts and flag them for removal. So what should be done next, and how might this impact the UK election just days away? In London, we're joined by Sasha Havlicek, Institute of Strategic Dialogue CEO, which works with Facebook. And in New York, Paul Quigley, CEO of NewsWhip. Great to have you both on the show. First of all, Sasha, explain a little bit about Institute for Strategic Dialogue and whether you really feel actually more regulation is the answer.
We've been working to combat extremism of all varieties for over a decade now, both offline and, of course, now more and more online. And we've done a lot of work with the internet companies, but also with government on this issue. There is a challenge. We see terrorists, we see extremists deploying incredibly professionally, slickly, if you like, online, and they've got a head start. We've seen too little done actually to compete with that message of hatred online. We see too little professionalization of the civic and credible voices that can do a lot to counter in this space. In many ways, this is where the tech companies can be the most effective and support really scaled, professionalized, upscaled endeavors in this space. But there is more they can do. They've admitted that themselves, and they've committed to setting up an industry body to drive not only counter speech in this space, which is really, really important, and education, because that's important too, but also technological innovation, because there is more that can be done to both identify and get rid of the most egregious content swiftly. The thing that we need to be, of course, worried about always is the overstepping of those lines. There's a lot of grey area content, very, very difficult to identify what, in all cases, should and shouldn't come down. And certainly that expertise often doesn't sit within the internet companies. I don't think anybody wants them to take on a full editorial role with regard to that content.
Paul, talking of editorial role, I mean, where do you think the battle at the moment is between tech versus government, and do you have a view on how the response has been thus far?
Well, I think what we've seen is when these kinds of problems have emerged before, the platforms have responded very quickly. Like NewsWhip tracks the sharing of different forms of content online and quantifies that data very exactly. And what we saw in the US election, a large amount of kind of fake or hyper-partisan news was spreading online. We saw much less in the French election, and even less again in the run-up to the UK election. So I think the tech companies don't want governments to come in. They're going to race in to try and solve those problems through technological means themselves before the laws get drafted, and hopefully, be successful in doing that. So I think that's the strategy that we'll see deployed again here.
The UK government and Theresa May is talking tough on this, but I think that the UK government also would prefer an industry-led solution. They have the best wherewithal to drive the technological response. There's no question about that. They're putting pressure on now to make sure that the internet companies follow through on the promises that they've made. But there is also something to be said for engaging, for letting certain types of accounts stay up online. We do a lot of work monitoring and identifying extremists prior to that law enforcement phase, prior to them crossing that threshold to terrorism. And there are ways in which we can engage further upstream those sorts of individuals and make a change in their attitudes,
don't wipe
in their
them out,
behavior.
basically, because you can't then target them.
Well, the issue is whether we drive them underground too far. There are constituencies that ultimately we want to be able to watch and ideally engage with successfully. Obviously, those engagements have to be done very carefully. They need to be done by people who have an intimate knowledge and understanding of those issues. We work a lot with networks of former extremists who reach out to those people online, credible voices from within communities, youth peer-to-peer typed engagements. The internet companies have been very, very solidly behind those sorts of activities. Facebook, as you know, has launched a major initiative to support counter-speech. So has Google supported such initiatives, and especially work on digital literacy, digital citizenships, internet citizenship has been a major thing. How do we get young people understanding how quickly they can fall into the rabbit hole of extremist sorts of communications online?
Paul, what you do is monitor the narratives, and as you say, throughout the US, the UK, the French election, you have seen changes. What about these sorts of effects ahead of a UK election, and do you monitor what currently we're seeing in terms of internet dialogue and how this is affected by such terrorist activity?
Yeah, what we're monitoring and we're really focused on is which content is being shared. It's a very strong indicator of what people are interested in and talking about. And the UK election is very much defined by, you could call it the earned media election, because the paid-for campaigns are not getting very significant sharing. We're seeing a lot of sharing of articles from The Guardian, The Independent, the BBC, and a reasonable amount of sharing of actually policy-focused stories. The most shared stories about the election so far are about fox hunting, free third-level education, or sales of arms to dictatorship. So these are the kind of things that are being talked about. While there was a good deal of engagement on the statements made by each of the party's leaders following the terror attacks in Manchester, there wasn't any big subsequent move of the narrative after that. I think the Conservatives are seeing an angle for attack here on Labour, but we haven't seen a huge pickup of engagement. Still, the most engaged stories in the run-up to the election are about fox hunting.
Which just amazes me, I have to say. Very quickly, both of you. Paul, firstly, what do you think? Are you optimistic that we can see some sort of an internet, internally bred, from the technology side of things, help prevent this sort of spread of extremism online?
Well, I'd agree that there will always be a grey zone. Like Twitter, has taken the step of removing 300,000 extreme accounts. Facebook has described itself as a hostile zone for terrorism. So there's going to be a lot of steps taken. Facebook's also doubling its number of moderators. There will always be the grey zone. So at what point does supporting a political cause in the Middle East, bleed into, expressing an extreme view? And I think so this discussion is not going to go away.
And Sasha,
which is why I would say this has to be a partnership between the private sector, between the tech companies and civil society. Ultimately, that's the private partnership needed to really respond to this challenge properly.
And organisations such as yourself helping with that, bridge that gap. Thank you very much indeed. It was wonderful having you both join us today. Thanks to Sasha Havlicek, Institute for Strategic Dialogue CEO, and in New York, Paul Quigley, CEO of NewsWhip. And coming up later in the hour, our exclusive interview with Apple CEO Tim Cook from the Worldwide Developers Conference. Our Emily Chang is sitting down with him right this moment. We'll bring you the conversation as soon as it wraps up. And a reminder of our new interactive TV function. You can find it at TV Go on the Bloomberg. You can watch us live if you miss an interview, or you can go back to it. You can send our producers a message, play along with the charts we bring you on air. This is for Bloomberg subscribers only, though, I'm afraid. Check it out at TV Go. This is Bloomberg.